When I said, this is a laughing fact, when I said in March, when we said in March, that we would collect the signatures needed to place this issue on the ballot, our Republican colleagues, many of whom I served with, brushed aside the notion that Ohioans would join collectively and gather enough petitions to place a referendum on the ballot, and then be successful in the campaign, the ensuing campaign. We did it, as we all witnessed, with overwhelming numbers with Senate Bill 5's repeal. And just several weeks later, we did it again, yet again, with the gathering of signatures for House Bill 194, which suppresses voter rights. If we were to just separate ourselves from the policy, the political philosophies we share, the fact that any state party can build such a coalition to place an issue on the ballot, be part of a coalition, to place something on the ballot, not just once, but twice, and now a third time, it should send a message to my Republican colleagues, many of whom I served with, and that message is enough. As some of you have written repeatedly, Ohio is a swing state. Let us work together across the aisle. Today is a great opportunity to do that. The House Rules and Reference Committee will meet today to discuss a congressional matter. I've not been invited to participate. I don't know if my House colleagues and leadership have been invited to participate. But Speaker Batchelder knows his history, and this is a great time to remember that if you fail to appreciate the past, you're perhaps damned to repeat it. And in this case, we must work together. And the Speaker knows that we will place House Bill 319 on the ballot. We will gather up enough signatures. We can prevent congressional chaos if he only would work together. We could find a meaningful solution and compromise. Let us use this day and the days ahead to achieve just that. But if they don't, to the heart of the question, we're not going anywhere. We're not leaving. The people of this state, the middle class, those families that we care so deeply about, those folks we sit next to at high school football games and we buy breakfast from in the morning in Main Street diners, they responded last night. And they'll respond again and again and again as the Republicans, if they choose to, continue overreach with the far right-wing agenda. Jim?
Chris, you talked about the message that the vote on Issue 2 sent. What did the message on Issue 3 say? Issue
3? Which one was that?
That was the healthcare amendment.
See, that's me being coy. Well, we all know the Constitution of the federal government and the Supremacy Clause, and the fact that while in Alabama, perhaps in the early 1960s, a constitutional amendment could have been added to their state constitution implementing segregation, it is not enforceable from the federal standpoint. I don't mean to suggest that those who are opposed to the President's health care initiatives, I don't want to equate them in the same breath, but in terms of implementation, oftentimes at the state level, we tend to forget those activists that push these kinds of divisive issues tend to forget that, in fact, the federal government and the Supremacy Clause makes what happened last night with regard to Issue 3 null and void. It was essentially a popularity contest. It's akin to placing on the ballot who you think should be the homecoming queen. These things come and they go, and it's unenforceable from the perspective of the President's health care initiative. Now, having said that, the Ohio Democratic Party, we spent our resources and our time, our activists and volunteers focused almost entirely on State Issue 2. As all of you know, this effort, regardless of one supports Issue 2 or didn't support Issue 2, if we were to just reflect on the effort and what we witnessed over the course of the last year, I think there should be respect shown for those who were so committed. You didn't see the effort on Issue 1 or Issue 3 because of the importance of Issue 2. Issue 2 must, and Issue 2 had to be repealed. And we knew that the future of the Ohio Democratic Party, the future of working families, the future of blue-collar jobs in this state depended on that. And we didn't want to be distracted for what essentially came down to a popularity contest with State Issue 3. I agree with some who have suggested, including newspaper editorial boards, that the implementation of Issue 3, while won't affect the President's health care initiative, it could affect Medicaid and Medicare reimbursements, could affect health care provision for the weakest among us, could affect the right to women to control their own bodies. So there will be that impact, and I'm sure the legislature will react because of it, and that we will continue to see that unfold. I think when asked, the majority of Ohioans would agree that breast cancer survivors should not be discriminated against if they're leaving the job they have today for a job they want tomorrow. And prior to the passage of ACA, the President's Health Care Initiative, employment bigotry included so-called pre-existing conditions. That's banned in the President's Health Care Initiative, and I think most Ohioans would support that. I think if asked, most Ohioans would agree that a soon-to-graduate college student should remain on their parents' health care plan while that soon-to-graduate student is looking for a future opportunity. I think most Ohioans would support that. And I think at the end of the day, most Ohioans believe that health care is right and not a privilege, as is collective bargaining.
But if you think the result on Issue 2 is a repudiation of a Republican overreach, why shouldn't the interpretation of the results in Issue 3 be repudiation of a Democratic overreach, as some are?
Because it's unenforceable. It is a popularity contest.
What popularity contest?
Whether or not you agree with the Congress and the President's intent to provide health care to all of us and not just some of us. Because it is such a convoluted and complicated issue, because there was no sustained effort to educate the voters as it relates to the implementation of Issue 3, I think that we return as Ohioans to emotion rather than fact, and I think that's the case with the state Issue 3.
Returning to Issue 2, what is your expectation and your hope about what happens legislatively? The Speaker has talked a little bit about that, what he can do.
Well, I believe at the root of this is the power of workers coming together to fight for good jobs in strong communities. There seems to be a disconnect among some leaders at the State House that janitors and police officers, that nurses, aides, and then firefighters aren't part of our state's economy. They are, in fact, integral parts of our state's economy. As somebody who recruited businesses to my community as a county commissioner, I can tell you that business leaders ask questions about what is the condition of the schools, what are the conditions of the community, what is the police department like, what is the fire department, what is the fire department like. Those questions are so important when growing a community from an economic perspective. And it seems to be rejected by those in the State House. We cannot just merely cut taxes and hope for the best. The fact of the matter is police and fire departments, teachers and custodians, nurses, aides and nurses, those folks who make up the very fabric of this state are part and parcel of our community. And rather than demonizing and scapegoating those individuals, I think we should lift them up. I think we should celebrate what makes Ohio great, and it's the very Ohioans I've just described. I'll tell you, you go to Xenia or Sandusky, as I have, and perhaps you have, if you ask a person on Main Street in Bucyrus who they'd rather rub shoulders with at a football game, it's going to be the local police officer, a local fire department official. It's going to be the local nurse's aide, the local nurse. It's not going to be the CEO of a far-off company that John Kasich's trying to impress by handing out public tax dollars in the hopes that somehow it's going to entice that person to come to this state.
Do you think there's going to be another bill? What do you think is going to happen next?
Choose wisely. Oftentimes legislators look at service over seats, or perhaps their version or definition of service. There are a few moderates left in the Republican caucus, and I suspect they're looking at their districts today and how they performed last night, and whether or not 55 or 60% response from their constituents could impact the members voting in favor of these kinds of ideas in the future. That's going to be seen. We're going to pay attention to it over the course of the next several weeks, and we'll remind those legislators or would-be legislators that it's time they follow what Governor Kasich suggested last night. We listen to the will of the people.